Hello, today is the 26th of May 2023, and today, I mean, on May 26th, Heidegger died. And by the way of this, as an homage to him, I want to reflect a little bit on one aspect of the relationship between Heidegger and architecture. And in the discussion will also be present Le Corbusier, and you'll understand why I bring both of them in this discussion. So I start with Heidegger's hut, which was the first, his home in the last years of his life. A very banal house in the mountains, without running water. He was bringing water inside the house from this spring, as you can see. So this was the house in which the very important German philosopher lived the last years of his life, together with his wife. The house doesn't look too bad, but it's a small house, as I said, without running water. I don't even know if they had a bathroom there or something. I mean, it's hard to believe that a man of his stature, cultural stature, and his prestige as well, chose to live in this way. And I'm sure it was not, an accidental decision. He took a lucid decision. He was sending a message to the world by choosing to live in this way. Here he is, smiling in a, teenage-like fashion. I like this picture very much of him, because it shows, the eternal kid within this major force in the world's philosophy and German philosophy. Here he is with the entrance in his house. Now you tell me, you are architects, how many of you would you accept to live in this way in the 21st century? Well, this picture was taken in the 20th century, but this picture was taken probably around 30 years, maybe 40 years after Le Corbusier built Villa Savoie. So you ask yourself, how come a man of Heidegger's complexity and sophistication would choose to live in this way? Yes, he still has a tie and probably an approximately white shirt, but look at him. He's bringing water into the house in this way, like the poorest peasant in a Romanian village. Why did he choose? He was a famous philosopher. Why did he choose to live like this? Was it maybe an intuition that later on, someone like the Japanese architect Su Fujimoto would talk about primitive futures? Maybe. So Heidegger bringing some water in the house, it moves me, this picture. It really does. And here he is, some negatively inclined critics or theoreticians like Mark Wigley criticized Heidegger for the fact that he was apparently, based on such a photograph, still promoting a patriarchal society where the lady, his wife, is cooking something and he is contemplating the mountains or the hills. But it was a division of work. I mean, they were married and they understood each other. So I'm sure his wife didn't protest. But, Mark Wigley even talked about the gingerbread house of Martin Heidegger, meaning this house. Well, on one hand, maybe it is, but on the other hand, it is not at all, because it is deprived of common, conveniences. It doesn't have, I mean, you see, it's a primitive way of living and one of the most brilliant minds of Germany and the world, chose to live like this in his later years. And you'll understand why this preoccupies me when I will also talk about Le Corbusier and his Le Cabanon. Again, we saw this picture. And here is the philosopher with his last dog, with his house. And here you see, you will see two faces, two men. I mean, this picture amused me in a way, because some people think that Peter Zumthor, who is on the left, is somehow close to Martin Heidegger, who is on the right. But I'm not so sure about it. Anyway, it is an interesting picture. And here it is Heidegger in his room, at his desk. Plenty of books, but you know, as I said, he was living very, very modestly. Sorry about this picture with all this, you know, Alami word claiming the authorship of the picture. And look at the bedroom of the great philosopher. He can barely open the door. Okay, someone could say that artwork or whatever it is on the wall is rather pathetic or banal. But what is sure is that the thinking of Martin Heidegger was not banal and was not pathetic. Was the profoundest form of philosophizing in the 20th century. So. And here he is, walking through the forest, the primitive man, the greatest German philosopher in the 20th century. Again, him otherwise very, you know, organized, as you can see. And the window, which is, you know, the opposite of the windows of Villa Savoye, but surprise, surprise, very similar to the window of Le Cabanon, in which Le Corbusier in his later years chose to live at least some months every year. So now we arrive at Le Corbusier's hut, and look at it. I mean, when I first saw this picture, I couldn't believe my eyes. Look at the window. But what is the difference between this window and this window? Almost none. It's a traditional window that you would, okay, you could say the philosopher was not interested in, you know, the dogmatic, stringent modernism that earlier Le Corbusier promoted. But Le Corbusier, you know very well, he had strong aesthetical requirements almost. I mean, I'm talking about the word requirement, and you wouldn't expect Le Corbusier to have such a window in his office. Now, the word office I should place between quotation marks, because this is actually a little room about 2 meters by 8 meters by 4 meters, so approximately 8 square meters, 2 by 4. It's a cabin. It's a cabin. It's true, oriented towards the Mediterranean Sea, and you see on the walls drawings by Le Corbusier for Chandigarh. This was, you know, his working place right near his living place in the south of France. And you are going to see Le Cabanon too, and maybe it will make you wonder, you know, how come that Le Corbusier, a sophisticated, mature architect, would choose to live in this way, at least a few months every year, and Heidegger in a very similar way also. But a side of Le Corbusier that is less known, and I didn't know it either, is revealed by the next quotation from him. There is nothing more lamentable than this mania of today to disown tradition for the sole purpose of creating the coveted new. How could this be? I mean, Le Corbusier was the prophet of the new, wasn't he? But this is what he wrote when he took, when he made a trip in the east, of Europe, and he even arrived in Romania, Journey to the East. And this quotation is from the book published with this name, Journey to the East. Let's read it again. There is nothing more lamentable than this mania of today to disown tradition for the sole purpose of creating the coveted new. Well, it seems Le Corbusier was actually highly appreciative of tradition. And this window here seems to say it. Now, the difference between the author of that quotation and the man we look at here is the difference between 22 years old man and maybe a 72 years old man. So about half a century separates the author of this quotation and the man we look at in this picture. Very provocative quotation from Le Corbusier. And yes, it is from this book. I regret I didn't mention the page and the publishing year when this book was published, but I double checked. It is from this book, Journey to the East. And look, this is the Le Cabanon, the house where he chose to live. Is like a vacation house, but he enjoyed very much being there, and he spent a lot of time there, several months every year. This is the office. So the picture that you saw him, at the desk with the drawings on the wall was taken inside this. I can't call it office. I mean, can you imagine an architect, even the lowest architect in the world, working in such a tiny room? It's 2 meters by at the most 4. So the room is maximum 8 square meters. You can't even call it a building. It was probably brought to this place by 4 moderately strong men supporting it from the bottom, from the corners. And it doesn't even have a foundation, as you can see. The office of Le Corbusier in the south of France. Now, he did have his own office in Paris, it's true, but he enjoyed this place very much. And the house you are going to see, Le Cabanon, is also almost ridiculously small and ridiculously primitive. It has about 16 square meters, so it's a little smaller than a typical living room built, by the communists, and not only the communists. So we are going to see it in detail. So this is the plan. Now you see the entrance is here through number 1 from the outside, and then what you see number 2 is a door which leads into a so-called restaurant. He was probably the only client of that restaurant. He was getting food from there directly into his Le Cabanon. You see there is here, the sanitary objects exposed, and there were 2 twin-size beds, one for him, one for his wife. But later, after his wife died, this bed disappeared. A desk, 2 chairs, if we are to call them chairs. They're actually 2 wooden boxes, probably very uncomfortable, but Le Corbusier was not uncomfortable with discomfort. And that's it, 16 square meters, all of it. Here you see some images. And you wonder, I mean, many, sorry to be harsh, but many mediocre architects have much more opulent, spaces than this architect, a major force in the culture and architecture of the world. So this was probably the plan. I mean, I don't know the original drawings of the plan, but I think it looks like, he made this project in this manner. Now, maybe this was drawn later, it's possible. But again, this was the house of Le Corbusier in the south of France. It's really a heroic little house, immensely small, if I can express myself in this way. This drawing, I think, was done by him or in his office. Le Cabanon at Roquebrune from 1952. So in 1952, he was 52 plus 13, so 65 years old when he built this house. He built this little hut for his wife, he said, well, for both of them, when they wanted to escape Paris. It's true, a magnificent view from the little hut. We see the roof of the hut here. He actually died while swimming in the Mediterranean Sea at 78. Some people even think that maybe he didn't die of natural or something. It might have been a suicide. We don't know. This was the house, if we can call it a house, of Le Corbusier in his later years, a vacation hut. But he spent several months every year. So he died at 78, but built it when he was 65. So he had this little hut for about 13 years. So I asked myself, how come a brilliant mind, a sophisticated architect and artist, a major force in culture, like Le Corbusier, chose to live in this way at least a few months every year, and Heidegger, equally brilliant in his domain, philosophy, chose also to live in a very primitive way. How come? Why is it they didn't need the conveniences that most of us cannot even imagine breathing without? Now, and obviously they had the highest standards, in terms of, creativity, accomplishments, and so on. And they had the means to live differently. And they chose to live so modestly, not to say, in a very primitive way. I think this question is legitimate, and perhaps it's worth asking it. Now, the house, is it small, Le Corbusier's hut? But it's full of him in a way, because you see artworks where you don't expect them. These are the chairs in the foreground, the so-called chairs. There are two wooden boxes. That's it. The master was sitting on them. And on the left, you see a fragment of his office, so to speak, that little room with the traditional vertical window that we started this section of the presentation with. Here is the wall that separates the so-called restaurant from his hut, and with a door that opens between them. Here is the master inside his little room. When I look at these pictures, I realize that in order to be creative, you don't need a lot at all. I mean, if you are a volcano of creativity, and certainly Le Corbusier was, and so was Heidegger, they needed almost nothing. So, maybe we shouldn't be so disappointed when we don't have large spaces and expensive things and so on. Because, someone like Le Corbusier or someone like Heidegger would tell us, stop it. If you are creative, prove it. You don't need riches, you don't need large spaces in order to manifest your creativity. And it's true. Here is a view from Le Cabanon towards the so-called office. And here, meaning towards this space, where the master is looking through the window and thinking of Chandigarh. Another picture with him. A look at the windows of the hut. I mean, would you have expected? In my opinion, this little hut is more revolutionary and more important than Villa Savoye, architecturally speaking. And actually, it's showing the way, because we talked today about sustainability. Well, I'm not sure Villa Savoye qualifies for a discussion about sustainability, but this hut does. This was the entrance into the hut, and you know, what is on the left is the separation, you know, between the hut and that so-called little restaurant. Okay, and now I would like to have a short discussion with you about what I just showed you, because I think it's important to talk about these matters.